The lights burned bright, the laughter too loud to be real. Joy Behar leaned back in her chair, tossing another quip across the table as the audience chuckled obediently. Nicolas Cage smiled politely. That polite Hollywood smile everyone wears on cue, but his eyes told another story. Tired, sharp, searching for something honest in a room rehearsed to the syllable. The laughter faded. Just for a second, silence crept in. And that was when the storm began to gather. Joy spoke again, teasing him about his new film, her tone laced with the kind of mockery that hides behind humor. So, Nicholas, how many times can you play yourself before it becomes a documentary? The crowd laughed harder this time. Cage didn't. He blinked slowly, then leaned forward. Joy, he said, voice low enough to hush the room. Some of us don't have to play a role to be real. The air snapped. Cameras caught every breath. The audience shifted, unsure if this was still part of the show. Behar smirked, unfazed. Oh, come on, nice, it's just a joke. But it wasn't. Not anymore. You could see it. Years of press junkets, talk show smirks, and soundbite caricatures all boiling behind his stillness. Funny, he said softly, how truth makes people uncomfortable. That line landed like a punch through the laughter. Behar tried to reclaim control, waving her hand, but the rhythm of the room had changed. Cage wasn't performing. He was present, raw, stripped of the Hollywood varnish. The camera zoomed tighter. Producers whispered frantically into headsets. And then, as if the air itself had weight, Cage's smile disappeared. This isn't a circus, he murmured, almost to himself. I'm not your clown. The crowd gasped. A few claps broke out, then silence swallowed them whole. Behar's face stiffened, that smile faltering just enough for the cameras to catch it. For the first time in years, the view didn't feel like a safe stage, it felt like a reckoning. The host opened her mouth to reply. But before she could, Cage's chair shifted slightly, the scrape of wood on tile echoing louder than applause. And in that sound was a promise. Something was about to break. But what pushed Cage to the edge wasn't what was said on camera. It was what had been building long before that morning. For years, The View had been more than just a morning talk show. It was America's televised argument. Every weekday, millions tuned in to watch opinions clash like cymbals, laughter masking tension, applause cushioning discomfort. It was a stage where conviction met caffeine, where celebrity and ideology shared the same hot seat. And at the center of it all sat Joy Behar, unapologetic, sharp, and famously unfiltered. She was the kind of voice that didn't just speak, she provoked. Her charm was equal parts warmth and warning, a smile that could disarm or dismantle in the same breath. Over the years, she'd sparred with presidents, preachers, and pop stars, always walking the tightrope between humor and hostility. It was her gift and her weapon. Audiences adored it. Critics called it chaos. But either way, no one ever changed the channel. That morning, the producers wanted spectacle, not sincerity. Cage was booked to promote a film, not to wage a war. But even they knew inviting him meant inviting unpredictability. Nicolas Cage was Hollywood's enigma. Too strange to fit, too brilliant to fade. His genius had always carried a wild edge, the kind that made directors nervous and audiences obsessed. Yet behind the eccentricity, there was something disciplined, almost monk-like, a man who had survived fame, failure, and the echo chamber of his own legend. He wasn't a stranger to confrontation. He just preferred not to waste it. When Cage spoke, it was never for shock value. It was for truth. And that truth, unpolished and inconvenient, was about to collide head-on with the queen of controlled chaos. This wasn't just another talk show spat. The narration might as well have said, it was a collision of two American archetypes, the unapologetic truth teller and the unapologetic provocateur. The studio had seen arguments before. Politics, culture wars, viral outbursts. But this was different. The tension wasn't manufactured, it was magnetic. The crowd didn't laugh to be polite. They laughed to fill the space between discomfort and disbelief. Joy Behar thrived in that space. Nicolas Cage destroyed it. As he leaned in, his voice level but heavy with unspoken fatigue. The audience sensed it. This wasn't about a film or a joke or even pride. It was about something older, something human. The demand to be understood, not performed. The producers could feel it too. In the control room, the live feed clock ticked mercilessly forward, but no one dared cut to commercial. There was electricity on that set. Unpredictable, dangerous, cinematic. And within minutes, that voltage would ignite the internet. Clips would spread, hashtags would multiply, and the View would never quite recover its polite facade again. But to understand what made Nicolas Cage finally snap, we need to rewind. For decades, Joy Behar had ruled the round table like a conductor commands an orchestra. Every interruption a cue, every smirk a symbol that she, not the guest, owned the tempo. She'd built her empire not on neutrality, but on nerve. The morning talk landscape was crowded with charm and small talk, but joy. She brought confrontation disguised as conversation. Viewers didn't just tune in for opinions, they tuned in for the spectacle of her confidence. The thrill of someone daring enough to say what others wouldn't. Her career had started in stand-up comedy, where timing and control were survival tools. She learned that laughter could be a weapon. That interruption wasn't rudeness, it was dominance. On The View, she carried that same energy. Every time a guest hesitated, she filled the silence with quips. Every time a viewpoint clashed with hers, she'd tilt her head, grin, and deliver a line that cut through intellect and landed straight in ego. The audience loved her for it. Producers counted on it. Politicians feared it. She'd sparred with politicians, actors, even presidents. The tabloids once wrote, "No one leaves her table without feeling the heat." And that was true. Her charm wasn't sweetness. It was fire, burning just hot enough to make her the star of every conversation. Yet somewhere in that dominance was a quiet arrogance, the kind that grows when applause becomes a habit. She didn't just believe she could win every exchange. She believed she deserved to. Her interruptions weren't accidents. They were signatures. When a guest made a valid point, she'd laugh to neutralize it. When someone got emotional, she'd pivot to humor, dismissing vulnerability with a quip. Her rhythm was surgical, never cruel enough to cancel her liability, but always sharp enough to remind everyone whose name was on the marquee. In the political chaos of daytime television, Joy Behar was untouchable. She was the last loud voice standing in a sea of polite TV smiles. But untouchable power breeds blindness. And on that morning, it was blindness that betrayed her. When Nicolas Cage sat across from her, she saw another celebrity, another soundbite to outwit, another story to bend into laughter. She didn't see the man who'd spent years wrestling with Hollywood's machinery. The man who'd turned pain into art and ridicule into resilience. She saw a headline, not a human. So, when she lobbed her first playful jab, she assumed it would bounce off like it always did. It didn't. It cracked something open. The crowd laughed, waiting for Cage to play along. Instead, he paused. That pause, longer than anyone expected, shifted the air in the room. For once, Joy didn't have a follow-up ready. Her rhythm faltered, her smile stiffened, and in that moment, her control began to fracture. Still, she pressed forward, unwilling to yield the stage. It wasn't malice, it was instinct. The instinct of someone who had built a career on winning the room. But this wasn't a debate she could win with wit. This was a collision between practice's arrogance and raw authenticity. And for the first time, her laughter wasn't enough to hide the tremor in her voice. Joy Behar wasn't the villain in her own story. She was the embodiment of a culture that confuses loudness for truth, entertainment for enlightenment. And as the cameras caught her forcing a grin, the audience could sense it. The queen of confrontation was about to meet her match. Because behind Cage's smirk was a storm that had been building for years. And it had nothing to do with Joy Behar, and everything to do with Hollywood itself. Before that morning on The View, Nicolas Cage had already lived through every act of the Hollywood tragedy. He was the golden prodigy who turned raw eccentricity into art, the rebel who refused to be predictable. In the 90s, he was a comet, Oscar in hand, scripts flooding his doorstep, critics calling him fearless. He didn't act for the camera, he devoured it. Every line, every stare, every unguarded flicker of emotion carried the intensity of a man who believed art should bruise the soul. But Hollywood doesn't stay in love for long. The same machine that crowns you also feeds on your fall. And when Cage's choices grew too strange, too unfiltered, the laughter began. The tabloids branded him a caricature, a walking meme before memes even had names. Headlines mocked his spending, his marriages, his expression. They turned his art into punchlines, his honesty into madness. Yet, through all that noise, he never stopped creating. He didn't chase coolness, he chased truth, even when it cost him everything that made him comfortable. He could have chosen the safe path, the franchises, the forgettable blockbusters, the polished image studios love. But Nicolas Cage was allergic to safe. He chased roles that scared him, scripts that made no sense until he filled them with his strange, electric sincerity. While others built careers on consistency, he built one on courage. That's why real fans never left him. They saw something raw in his chaos, something human. Still, the cost was heavy. Hollywood turned cold, late. Night hosts turned cruel. And the cameras stopped seeing him as an artist. They saw him as spectacle. But Cage never played the victim. He retreated into something purer. Independent films, small sets, long silences. He learned to live without the industry's applause, to define success by integrity rather than relevance. He wasn't just another actor selling a movie, the narrator would say. He was a man who'd seen fame, fall, and freedom, and had learned that silence can be louder than applause. That silence became his armor. Off screen, Cage was gentle, philosophical, a collector of rare books and stranger thoughts. He spoke often about spirituality, about the thin line between performance and existence. He believed acting wasn't pretending. It was revealing. And that belief made him allergic to preteens. Interviews bored him because they required a mask. Talk shows felt like charades where sincerity was the punchline. So when he agreed to The View, it wasn't out of excitement. It was obligation. Another stop on the endless circuit of promotion. Another round of polite laughter and empty questions. He walked on set with a smile, but inside, he was somewhere else, half detached, half guarding himself. He'd been through too many performances dressed as conversations to expect anything real. And then came Joy Behar. Her laughter, sharp in practices, sliced through the air like it always did. But to Cage, it wasn't just laughter. It was the echo of every headline, every mockery, every time the world had mistaken vulnerability for weakness. She laughed, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't perform. He didn't smile to smooth it over. He didn't play the Hollywood game. He let the discomfort live. The cameras caught the flicker in his eyes. A man deciding in real time that he would no longer dance for anyone's amusement. It wasn't anger, it was revelation. Which is why, when Joy Behar turned that laugh on him, he didn't laugh back. The silence that followed was heavier than words. It wasn't a pause. It was defiance, soft and absolute. The crew shifted, sensing something they couldn't quite name. The studio lights still burned, but they couldn't melt the tension building between the actor who had nothing left to prove and the host who'd never learned when to stop. And in that silence, the energy on set shifted from interview to interrogation. The tension started small, almost invisible, like static building between two frequencies that shouldn't share the same air. Joy Behar leaned forward, smile sweet but sharp, her voice slicing through the set's polite hum. You know, Nicholas, you've had some interesting film choices lately, she said, letting the word, interesting, linger like perfume. Do you ever wake up and think, maybe I should have just said no to half of them? The audience laughed. Too quickly, too obediently. It was the kind of laughter that wasn't about humor. It was about loyalty to the room. Cage smiled faintly, his jaw tightening beneath the polite curve of his lips. Every choice I've made, he said evenly, was mine to make. Sometimes art doesn't ask permission to exist. Behar tilted her head, feigning admiration. That's beautiful, she said, dripping with sarcasm. But come on, Wicker Man, the bees. You've got to admit, me? Some of that was a little much. More laughter, louder this time. Cage shifted in his chair. His hands, resting on his knees, flexed once, then stilled, his eyes unblinking, held hers for a beat longer than was comfortable. I don't measure my work by memes, he replied softly. Behar chuckled, waving a dismissive hand. No one's saying that, honey, but you've got to be able to laugh at yourself. Cage leaned in slightly, his voice quiet but charged. I laugh when it's funny, he said. Not when it's easy. The audience hesitated, half wanting to laugh, half sensing this wasn't the moment. The tension was spreading now, subtle but undeniable. Behan's grin tightened. She wasn't used to guests who didn't play along. She interrupted before he could finish his thought. Well, you're in the right place. Nay, we specialize in not taking ourselves too seriously. He turned toward her fully, something in his eyes shifting from patience to precision. Maybe that's the problem, he said, each word landing like a slow drumbeat. Behar blinked. Excuse me, Cage didn't raise his voice, didn't flinch. Maybe what's killing conversation in this country, he continued, is that everyone's laughing while nothing's funny. The air changed. The laughter stopped. For a moment, the room felt smaller, the air thicker. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. Behar crossed her arms, defensive now. Oh, please. You're not really gonna lecture us on culture, are you? This is The View, not National Treasure. The jab landed. Cheap but effective. A ripple of laughter returned, nervous but eager. Cage smiled. But it wasn't a smile of surrender. It was something older, quieter, born from years of being misunderstood. You're right, he said. This isn't National Treasure. That was fiction. This. He gestured lightly toward the cameras, the table. The studio lights. This is performance. Behar opened her mouth. But he continued before she could interrupt. Everyone here playing a part, pretending it's honesty. I get it. That's television. Now, no joy, he said, still calm. You wait. The words cut through the air like a blade. The audience gasped, unsure whether to cheer or recoil. Behar leaned back, momentarily stunned. You could feel the panel's energy splintering, hosts glancing at producers, producers whispering into headsets, stage managers gesturing frantically from the sidelines. Cage didn't move. He didn't shout. He just was centered and unyielding. You invited me here to talk about a film, he said quietly. Not to become one. Behar tried to laugh it off, but it came out brittle. Oh, come on, Nee. It's just conversation. He tilted his head, his voice barely above a whisper now, but somehow louder than anything that came before. No, it's noise, silence. Absolute, heavy silence. The kind that swallows every sound before it hits the floor. The camera zoomed closer, instinctively, hunting the headline in real time. Behar's face was a mask, half offense, half disbelief. The audience didn't dare move. And then Cage looked straight into the lens, breaking the unspoken rule of television, and said something no one in that studio would forget. The next words out of Cage's mouth froze the studio in silence. But it wasn't just what he said. It was what he did next that made television history. The silence before the storm was almost holy. Cameras hummed. The air conditioner droned. And every person in that studio knew they were standing at the edge of something unscripted, something that couldn't be contained by a commercial break. Nicolas Cage sat perfectly still, shoulders squared, eyes locked on Joy Behar, who tried to fill the void with nervous chatter, but words were slipping from her like sand through fingers. Cage exhaled slowly, then spoke with the calm precision of a man who had waited years for this moment. You say it's just conversation, he began, his voice steady, deliberate. But conversation implies curiosity, not ambush. Behar gave a tight smile, feigning composure. Oh, come on, Nye. We're just having fun. He raised a hand, not aggressively, but with quiet authority. And the soundboard caught the faint tremor of his ring against the table. The gesture froze her mid-sentence. Fun, he repeated softly. That word, you hide behind it. You turn everything into entertainment, even people's pain, even truth. A ripple went through the audience, half applause, half shock. One of the co-hosts shifted uncomfortably. The camera cut briefly to her, eyes darting between Behar and Cage, as if praying the producers would cue a commercial. But no cue came. Cage continued, his tone sharpening. You invite guests here, not to listen, but to perform. You poke, prod, interrupt, because outrage sells. But here's the thing, when outrage becomes a product, empathy becomes the casualty. Behar blinked, stunned by the sudden gravity. That's a nice speech, she said, voice brittle. But this is television, Ning. People want energy. Cage leaned forward, elbows on the table, gaze unwavering. Energy without honesty is noise, he said, and America's drowning in it. The audience erupted in murmurs. Someone clapped, then stopped, unsure if applause was appropriate. Behar tried to regain footing. You're saying we're the problem, please. You've made movies built on chaos. He smiled slightly, the corner of his mouth lifting with quiet irony. Yes, he said, movies about chaos, not made from it. Her smirk faltered. Oh, come on, you can't seriously compare. I can, he interrupted, his tone still even, because when I play madness, it's a reflection. When this show plays it, it's a strategy. The audience gasped again. A producer offstage muttered something into a headset. The lighting seemed harsher now, the air heavier. The panel sat frozen, each co-host glancing nervously toward the control booth. Cage turned slightly toward the camera, his voice softening, no longer directed at Behar, but at the invisible millions watching. People think fame is freedom, he said, but it's not. It's a cage built from applause. You start performing for approval, not for truth. That's what I walked away from. That's what I refuse to play anymore. Behar's tone shifted, less combative now, more defensive. Well, we're all just doing our jobs, Exactly, he replied. And that's the tragedy, because somewhere along the line, the job stopped being about truth and started being about trending. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd, the sound of realization, of something too close to home. He leaned closer, eyes narrowing, not in anger, but in clarity. You laugh at people who don't fit your script, but the real art, the real courage is in letting people be, not editing their humanity for ratings. Behar opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. Cage waited, giving her the space to respond, but she didn't. The silence stretched long enough for every camera in the room to catch it. Her hesitation, his calm, the invisible shift of power. Then came the line that would replay across the internet for weeks. He leaned in, voice low and steady. I came here to talk about truth, not to play your game. A hush descended so deep it felt physical. You could hear a chair creak in the back row, the faint click of a camera lens adjusting. The audience wasn't breathing. The panel wasn't blinking. And then, without a hint of drama or rage, Cage pushed his chair back. The sound of it scraping against the studio floor sliced through the silence like thunder. He stood, slow, deliberate, every movement precise. He adjusted his jacket, gave a small nod toward the stunned co-hosts, and looked once more into the camera. You don't have to shout to be heard, he said quietly. You just have to mean it. Then he turned and walked off set, not storming, walking calm, collected, untouchable. The lights glared against his back as he disappeared behind the curtain, leaving the hosts frozen in disbelief. Behar stared after him, lips parted, but no words came. For a moment, the show was suspended in limbo. Cameras still rolling, audience caught between awe and confusion. Then someone whispered, "Did that just happen?" And the room erupted. Applause. Gas chaos. The director's voice crackled through the intercom. Cut to commercial now. But it was too late. The internet already had it. Within minutes, the clip hit social media. And what happened next left the entire internet in disbelief. By the time the credits rolled on The View, the real show had already begun. And it wasn't happening on television. It was happening online. Within minutes, clips of Nicolas Cage's quiet defiance flooded Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, every digital corner that fed on outrage and awe. Someone uploaded the footage titled, "Nicolas Cage Destroys Joy Behar Live." Within 10 minutes, it had 1 million views. Another caption reads simply, "He didn't walk off. He walked away." The algorithm smelled blood and truth in equal measure, and the moment exploded into culture. Ignited like brush fire, Pay Cage walks, fat justification, fire over thought, Pay Cage rage, fat the View meltdown. Within hours, it wasn't just trending, it was everywhere. News outlets clipped and replayed the walk off from every angle. Influencers recorded reaction videos dissecting his tone, his timing, his calm. Political commentators on both sides spun their takes. Was Cage standing for authenticity or losing control? Cable networks called it a meltdown. YouTube called it a masterclass. Twitter called it a revolution. Under one viral tweet, a user wrote, "That wasn't a walk-off. That was an exorcism of fake media energy in real time." Another responded, "Finally, someone said what we've all been screaming into the void. Stop laughing at everything that matters." The replies piled up by the thousands. On TikTok, the sound of Cage saying, "You don't have to shout to be heard," became a trend. Remixed into motivational edits. Protest my study mixes. Teens lip synced it. Veterans reposed it. Activists used it under footage of rallies and vigils. Somewhere between irony and sincerity, it transformed from a celebrity quote into a generational mantra. Late night shows tried to mock it, but even their jokes sounded hollow. Something about that moment felt untouchable. Raw, real, unpredictable in a media landscape built on predictability. Supporters called it the most authentic moment on daytime TV. Critics rolled their eyes, saying Cage knew exact that as do he was doing, that it was all performance, another meta act from Hollywood's great eccentric. But the more they analyzed, the less they could dismiss the silence that followed his words. It was the silence that haunted them, the absence of noise in a world addicted to sound. Celebrities began weighing in. An actor tweeted, "That wasn't about Joy Behar. That was about all of us pretending we're listening when we're just waiting to talk." A musician posted, "Sage walked off a talk show and somehow said more than any interview I've seen this year." A politician's aide quoted the clip during a campaign live stream, calling it the kind of clarity missing in leadership. The ripple effect grew strange and wide. Morning shows replayed it as a cautionary tale. Podcasters dubbed it the end of performative media. College professors dissected it in communications classes. Brands tried to co-opt it, posting awkward graphics with slogans like, "Speak your truth, Fant Cage energy." But the people, the viewers, the silent millions scrolling on their phones late at night, felt something deeper. They didn't just see an actor walking off a set. They saw themselves tired of fake smiles, tired of polite lies, tired of shouting into a world that wasn't listening. Someone wrote in a viral Medium post, "He didn't explode. He didn't fight. He reclaimed his silence." And in that moment, every overlooked person in America stood up with him. The article was shared hundreds of thousands of times. Underneath, comments poured in from teachers, nurses, factory workers, immigrants, people far removed from Hollywood, but deeply connected to the moment's honesty. "That's how I feel at work meetings," one wrote. "Everyone's talking, but no one's saying anything real." Meanwhile, Joy Behar's team released a statement, carefully worded, predictably polished. "We respect Nicolas Cage and regret that emotions ran high during a spirited conversation." The internet laughed. It sounded less like regret and more like spin. Cage, for his part, said nothing. No press release, no interview, no Instagram post. His silence became its own headline. CN ran a chyron that read, "Nicolas Cage breaks the internet, then goes quiet." By the end of the week, the clip had 48 million views across platforms. It wasn't just a talk show moment anymore. It was a mirror, reflecting something Americans didn't know they were starving for: sincerity. The cultural commentators finally stopped asking, "Was he right?" and started asking, "Why did this hit so deep?" Because deep down, everyone knew the answer. It wasn't just about Nicolas Cage. It was about a country exhausted by noise, craving truth spoken softly. It was about watching someone choose authenticity over applause and realizing how rare that had become. But when the dust settled, one question remained. Why did it hit so deep? He didn't storm out to escape. He walked out to remind people that dignity still matters, even when the cameras are rolling. In a world addicted to noise, Nicolas Cage's quiet defiance became more than a viral clip. It became a mirror. It showed how rare authenticity has become, how uncomfortable truth feels when it doesn't come packaged in entertainment. For once, silence wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Across living rooms and comment sections, people weren't just watching a celebrity. They were watching a kind of courage they'd forgotten existed. The courage to walk away, not in anger, but in peace. It wasn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was reclamation of boundaries, of self-respect, of the idea that not everything has to be a performance to be powerful. In an age where opinions echo louder than understanding, his act said something dangerous and beautiful, that real strength doesn't need to shout. The world had grown so used to people clawing for attention that it forgot the impact of restraint. But in that single and deliberate walk off, Cage flipped the narrative. He didn't give them the outburst they expected. He gave them the silence they didn't know they needed. For years, The View, like much of the media, had built its empire on conflict disguised as conversation. Outrage had become oxygen. Debate was theater, and empathy was the casualty. But in walking away, Cage rejected the script. He refused to be another clip in the cycle of endless provocation. He reminded everyone that truth, stripped of spectacle, still holds power, maybe even more so when it isn't performed for applause. What made his silence echo wasn't a gesture itself, but the clarity behind it. It wasn't about winning or proving Joy Behar wrong. It was about something purer. The quiet insistence that conversation without respect isn't conversation at all. In that moment, the power dynamic flipped. The man mocked for being unpredictable became the embodiment of control. The show built to dominate attention found itself silenced by stillness. And maybe that's why it struck so deep, because it wasn't just about Hollywood or politics or media ego. It was about all of us. Every person who's ever sat in a room and felt their truth talked over. Every worker who stayed quiet in the face of arrogance because speaking up wasn't good for the team. Every voice told to be smaller so someone louder could feel right. Cage's moment didn't go viral because it was dramatic. It went viral because it was real. It was the opposite of performance. A man refusing to trade integrity for airtime. A man saying, without saying it, I won't let you turn honesty into entertainment. That defiance. Calm, deliberate, human, cut deeper than any insult could. He became a vessel for something timeless. The reminder that walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's knowing that not every fight deserves your fire, and not every platform deserves your presence. In an era where everyone wants to go viral, Cage chose to go silent, and somehow that made the loudest noise of all. People will forget the debate, the interruptions, even the words. But they'll remember the image. Nicolas Cage standing, pushing back his chair, and leaving without anger or apology. That image will linger because it wasn't about celebrity. It was about principle. And in that moment, he wasn't just an actor. He was every person reclaiming their peace. Every soul choosing truth over theatrics. Every human being remembering that dignity is not outdated. It's revolutionary. Sometimes the loudest truth is spoken in silence. And sometimes walking away is the most powerful thing a person can do. And that's what made this moment more than viral. It made it human. Nicolas Cage storms off The View. That was the headline, the clickbait. The phrase stamped across every thumbnail and trending tag. But after everything we've seen, the question still hangs in the air. Was it anger or authenticity? Weakness or wisdom? Maybe it was never about storming off at all. Maybe it was about stepping away from noise, from provocation, from the endless loop of people performing conviction without ever meaning it. Cage didn't raise his voice, and he didn't flinch. He just chose stillness over spectacle. And that choice said more than any argument could. In a culture that rewards outrage, moments like this remind us that restraint is its own kind of revolution. That silence, when it comes from clarity, can be the loudest act of all. So now, it's your turn to decide. Was Nicolas Cage walking away a moment of weakness or a masterclass in dignity? Was it defiance or liberation? Or maybe it was both. If you believe authenticity should never be punished, share this story. Because the next time the world laughs at someone for standing their ground, they might just be witnessing courage. Every era has its moments of truth. Quiet, uncomfortable, unforgettable. This was one of them. And as the music fades, one line remains, not shouted, but whispered to whoever still listens. Silence is not surrender. Sometimes it's the final word.